we've had what I hope everyone agrees has been a really thought-provoking, provocative, sometimes knotty, definitely fascinating and educational session so far. But I assume it has thrown up some questions for our audience and the people in the room. So this is an opportunity, this is our town hall, where you get the chance to ask any questions, share any ponderings, thoughts, wonders, critiques, things you've been really intrigued by or really impressed by, anything you want to know. So we have some roaming mics that will move around the room. You might have to be a little bit patient and pass the mic down. I feel like there's a TV show where they used to do that. Don't know where that's from. Anyway, but if you can help us by doing that, that'd be really helpful. And if anybody has any questions, you might have I should also say, when you do ask a question, we'd love it if you could introduce yourself. So tell us your name, maybe the organisation you're from, or maybe the part of the industry you're from. And if there's anyone specific you're directing your question to, that would be really helpful to know, or you can just generally send it out to all the panel. Okay, so I'm going to open the floor. We're going to wait till we've got a few hands up. We'll take a few questions, and then I'll turn to our panel for answers. So does anyone have a question? We've already got a couple. Right, lovely. Okay, thank you. Lovely, yes, please. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm a private client tax advisor. Probably a bad starting point. My question is sort of internally within the firms, and Claire, you alluded to it with sort of 300-year-old organisations that have really focusing on the bottom line and doing what they've always done and doing that well, trying to convince internally how one changes attitude and takes the approaches that we've all been talking about today.
Thank you, Catherine. Lovely. We'll come back to that question in a moment. If we can take another one, we'll take a few. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tara Sibry-Collier. I'm an impact investor, impact investment advisor, also a visiting fellow here at the Said Business School Call Center. I have two questions just to give some variety for you to pick from. The first, I know many of you are considering the way that your wealth and the way to advise wealth can generate systems change and lead to the world we want to create. I wanted to understand where the concept of racial equity is fitting within your strategizing, your planning, and your support. I've been involved, my second question, just you can pick either of the two questions you want to invest. I've been involved in the climate finance, gender lens investing, and racial equity investing spaces for a long time. It's been beautiful to see the momentum around climate finance. And when I got involved with gender lens, it was in the early days, like 2008 at the World Bank. I mean, in 2014, gender lens investing was like only like 200 million. And today, gender lens investing has gone all the way up to like nearly, I believe, 20 billion. I'm sure someone here can give me the exact figure. And that's been a really fast momentum within 10 years. Hoping to see the same momentum for racial equity investing. So because this is a good ancestor movement, in the gender lens investing space, we saw a few tipping points. And even in the climate finance space, there have been a few tipping points around COP. I'd love to hear from anyone who has thoughts what the tipping points are for the good ancestor movement to become, you know, I wouldn't say mainstreamed, but to where it's almost cross-cutting and a going concern. So either of those two questions for anyone who'd love to take them would be wonderful.
Lovely. So we'll start with those three questions. We'll put those to our panellists. So we've got a question on what does this mean for racial equity? What's the tipping point for the good ancestor movement? And also, how do we change really traditional institutions that have been entrenched in their ways for quite a long time? So do any of our panellists want to pick up any of those three questions? Thank you.
I'll just pick up how do you change the institutions so it might be quite entrenched. I think on that point, it comes down to really focusing on what do our clients want. That's the language that most of the partners we work with in our firms will understand. Actually, what are our clients' expectations? And obviously, we work for a vast range of clients, many of whom would take real issue with some of the stuff that's been discussed here today, let's be honest. But a growing number of whom would welcome to hear more on this and would welcome to see firms engaging with this. And I think what I've taken so far from being involved with the Good Ancestor movement is, how can we change the language on our websites to encourage clients to engage with us further? How do we approach our client meetings so we can take some time to think about that client and what their objectives are beyond just a fiscal objective? So I think it's really focusing on what our clients want and looking at it through that lens, we'll start to implement change.
If I can just build on that, I think capturing people's kind of hearts and minds and getting the emotions aligned will also make a difference. And certainly for me today, hearing the stories from the wealth holders is far more impactful than people telling you what you should and shouldn't be doing, if you're hearing it from the clients and prospective clients. So I think the more that we can take those stories back to our firms and share them and try and amplify those, I think that will, to your point about what do our clients want, it will demonstrate the fact that there is a large and growing group of clients that want this.
Look at the people that aren't your clients. People that aren't your clients and what they want. Because if you just look internally, I think your change will be slower than it could be if you look outside.
On the racial question, the UK is a complicated place to have these discussions because of the presence of resident non-domiciled individuals who are coming from all over the world. So when we're talking about wealth that should be taxed, there are different kinds of wealth with different racial histories and conditions around them. And what I mean by that is when we're talking about intergenerational or multi-generational wealth, that is going to be much more likely tied to legacies of colonialism, legacies of slavery, legacies of extraction, legacies that are grounded in forms of white supremacy, right? By definition, this is not me editorializing. This is about the unfair advantages of the past that have played a part in the accumulation of intergenerational wealth, right? So I think that carries a certain set of burdens, arguably, on the wealth holder. If you're talking about entrepreneurial wealth or first-generation wealth, that's going to be more diverse in terms of the conditions surrounding its acquisition. And then when you're talking about people who have their wealth here or their advisors here but are coming from all over the world, we haven't even touched on the ways that different countries or cultures, and this also comes to the tipping point conversation, relate really differently to wealth. One of the interesting things that came up with the ownership project, looking at these large family businesses, were the similarities that existed between families that own businesses who were coming from a current conflict or post-conflict zone to Jewish families who had fled from different parts of Europe to the UK decades ago, but were bonded over the similarity of how trauma was informing that family's relationship to wealth, and that for them, protecting their family was not discretionary, but was a survivalist impulse. So, this is all to say that race is 100% inextricably bound up in these conversations, plus culture, plus history. And so the more we can start to segment where the wealth is coming from and how it was made and by whom and under what conditions and what sorts of national conditions people are contending with, I think, how this movement can grow is that service providers should be equipped to have those kinds of specialized conversations, right? I don't believe that's the status quo, but that's absolutely an area for the sector to grow.
I think I might just jump in there to your point, to build on what Bridget is saying, which is to say that at the Good Ancestor Movement, our starting hypothesis is that the most strategic role for private capital at this time, in view of the multiple existential crises that we're facing, structural and systemic inequity, is really for excess capital to be diverted from kind of mainstream, what Jake always refers to as asset price speculation, and actually to be invested in the real economy, having regard to the injustices that communities who have been harmed by the prevailing economic system have suffered. So that they've been dispossessed, they've been extracted from, and we really see the role of excess capital as going back into those communities by way of repair. And we're working on some of our framing with Esther as an organisation, and later down the line, we hope to be able to actually facilitate investment activity into communities that have been harmed by the extractive economy. And those communities are typically racialized, minoritized communities. And so, the reason it's called a movement is that this work is emergent and it's growing, and it's going in that direction. We're not there yet, but it's very much our guiding principle to ensure that we see reparative redistribution. And by definition, that means that communities that are racialized will be coming into capital.
Thank you. I think I'm going to go back out to the audience if that's okay. So do we have any more questions? Lovely, I've already got a microphone over here. I can see more people with hands.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elena. I'm CEO of Unblockers. And actually, I'm sorry. And actually, my phone is ringing. My alarm to pick up my son from school. But today. My question, first of all, before the question, I wanted to say huge thank you for Good Ancestors movement. I was on the edge. Should I go or should I not? I was not well yesterday and my voice is still going. And so the point is, what I wanted to say, thank you for everyone who is here, because it's exceeded all my expectations. You are singing the song for my heart, because I've seen so many wealthy people in my life who actually don't care, who actually do not want to hear about generations who never had opportunities in life. And today it's a huge relief, because in reality what I can see here on the stage and people who are talking between seats, life is changing, and what you are doing, it's incredible. And my question is, like, I heard so many of you mention that transparency is important, but in reality, transparency is there. Already 10 years we have a blockchain, and not many companies in the actual world want to implement blockchain because of their narrative. Like, they do not want to see where money are going. They do not want to see that farmers in Africa paid 4 cents for the avocado that we are paying here $4, 4 pounds. And we provide this transparency and traceability for everything, for housing, for water, for energy. How do you personally implement it, and how your clients, whether they are open to actually see where money are going?
Thank you.
That's my question.
Thank you. Thank you for the reflections as well. And I should say, not just questions, reflections are also welcome. And we'll come back to your question. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Robert Palmer from Tax Justice UK. We campaign to get a fairer tax system, including higher taxes on wealthy people. When I speak to politicians of all parties, if they are at their most candid, they say, we kind of like what you're saying, Robert, but we don't believe it's possible to tax wealthy people, or at least tax wealthy people more. So I'd be interested in what you would say back to them.
Thank you. Lovely. And we'll take one final question, if that's okay.
My question is around kind of being tax positive. So when I started my career, I remember having conversations with people when, kind of the war was going on in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and it was, there was definitely kind of like a resistance to kind of, being tax positive, because the idea was, money's being wasted. And we have this conversation now with kind of all these PPE scandals where it was seen as a better option to minimize the tax you pay and work more on philanthropy, where you would have more control and be able to see better how your money was spent. So yeah, I'll just invite your comments on that.
Thank you. Lovely. So we'll take those questions then. So we've got a question on transparency. So we already have the ways of making transactions transparent, but why is that not happening and what can we do? We've got politicians who are saying they don't believe that this is doable. And then we've got some comments on, sorry, I've just lost my train of thought, tax. What have we just said? Being tax positive, thank you so much. Being tax positive and how we can move towards that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next 25 minutes are mine. You're such a nice crowd. So, first of all, to your question, was it Robert? Okay, Robert, thank you. It's the traditional way of taxing, frankly. It's the oldest way of taxing is taxing wealth. And our modern version of the income tax is maybe 200 years old at best. So, frankly, just look up your history drawer, go through the laws and be like, oh, look at that, it's a wealth tax. Let's try to put this into 21st century democracy. So you could say that. It's like, it's a traditional thing, especially the Tories will love that. The traditional way of getting public money is go after the rich people. Also, I want to comment on what you said, because I've been asked this a lot. What do you do around tax justice when you don't live in a democracy? And I always say I can only speak for democratic structures and within democratic systems. I cannot have this conversation in a system that doesn't do democracy, as in completely. This is not a really nice sentence, but I'm tired and I'm going to blame it on the biscuits that were delicious. So basically what I want to say is I think it is really important to make sure that even if you go a philanthropy route or whatever else you're going to do in order to get money from wealthy people into communities who need it, the processes should be democratic, as in like make people that are affected by the crises or by the problems or by whatever you're dealing with be part of the actual decision making, and by this help create a democratic environment. I think the democratic processes are much more important than the democratic result, because if the processes aren't democratic, the result won't be. But if they are, the result also will be. So these processes are important. This democratic approach is important. This focus, this very, very stubborn focus on democracy, democracy, democracy. How can we make this livable, participatory, inclusive, fun? You know, I mean, it's tedious. Usually it's a task, it's work. But these aspects are really important. And I wanted to comment on that. And who else wants part of my 25 minutes?
My only one thought on that in response to your question was about saying back to politicians about education. If it's about, oh, we don't think we can do it to the wealthy because they won't want to do it, it's because there's not a clear enough understanding of what actually, how good tax can be and what it does for our society. And I used to be a teacher, and like one of the compulsory things I had to teach was Spanish grammar. Why is Spanish grammar higher up the education agenda than understanding tax? So I think that's something that the politicians should definitely be thinking about. There's lots of other failures of the education system, but we'll stick with maybe tax literacy for now.
Yes, I agree with everything you're saying, and it's so good for us to focus on the tax question. And Patriarch of Millionaires is here, Rebecca Gowland's here, and one of the things that I love about that movement, talking about movements, is the focus on the framing, on the languages and the stories that we're told time and time again. And as we heard this morning, the negative framing in the language talks about your family and your protection, and you need to get away from it. You need to minimize the burden, all this negative framing. If the framing changes and we talk about tax as a patriotic thing, it's got a big American connotation, I know that word, but let's just actually, what does that mean? You know, it's about building your society, it's about building your nation. If taxes are paying for teachers and schools and doctors and roads and good infrastructure, why would you not want to contribute to that? And often it gets pushed down the philanthropy angle. But we have to, and we do philanthropy, but we have to remember that philanthropy, there's a link with philanthropy and power, and so there's a link with philanthropy and injustice. So yes, it is a value, but how about a vision where philanthropy isn't needed anymore because everything's working? So it's just changing the dialogue and the conversation and the framing. The same things are being said, so there's the same responses.
And like a sort of, I think there's a sort of parallel point to the framing point, which is the cultural framing point, which is so deeply ingrained and so important to change. There's also, and it's interesting that you can't spend long thinking about tax before you start thinking about democracy. And it's no coincidence that our democracies are under so much threat because wealth doesn't participate in our tax system and it doesn't participate in our democracy. So we have a sort of weird situation where there's this kind of netherworld which doesn't really show up. And so you end up living in a society where the state cannot fulfill its obligations because the revenue is leaving so much money on the table. And it's leaving so much money on the table because recently this phenomenon of extreme wealth has become so extreme because of the Piketty described self-reinforcement loops of wealth getting ever greater. So the new wealth that's created just accrues to the people who've already got a lot of wealth. And so it's like drifts like snow. And it doesn't get touched by the tax system. And the tax system keeps looking on these hollowed out middle classes ever more, taxing more and more income. You know, these people are already squeezed to the marrow. And yet there's this untouched pile of wealth over there. So, and that undermines democracy. So it's no surprise that one of the consequences of that is populism. It's no surprise that we end up with Boris Johnson followed by Liz Truss. You know, that's what happens. So if you are somebody of wealth and you don't want to be confronted by pitchforks and guillotines, then it really is not a bad idea to start connecting the idea of paying your bloody taxes with living in a society where you're safe. And yeah, so basically this is about, for me, this is a lot to do with enlightened self-interest as well as that more broad interdependent spirit.
Thank you.
I guess
We'll take a last comment, sorry, and then we'll go back out for questions.
I just thought probably as a private client lawyer, I should probably say something.
Definitely.
You know, some great points have been made there. I think we have to also acknowledge, though, that the government is clearly keen to figure out how do we make sure we don't encourage investment in the UK, we encourage growth in the UK, and how do we get the balance right? And I think that is a really important aspect of this that we can't ignore. And then at the same time, also, I think there is a tendency, a natural tendency, a behavioural tendency that we need to tackle within our industry where tax changes are imminent and everyone will be glued to their TVs at the budget time to work out what tax changes are afoot and what can be done to help clients deal with those tax changes. And it'll be framed in a way that's seen as quite detrimental. And I think there is something there which is coming across today around actually, is it really detrimental? What are really the fiscal consequences of this for you as an individual? Is it really that bad? But I think one of the challenges with tax always, and I don't know how we deal with this, is a lack of trust in the government. And actually, you know, yeah, okay, I'm spending lots of money on taxes, but where is it really going? And I know we could probably debate that to the hilt, but I think, again, it's just a point we have to bring to the floor here because that is what I hear from my clients. And that's why they tend to focus on things such as philanthropy, because they feel that's where they can have more direct impact than maybe the government can have. So I just think we have to bear those points in mind.
Thank you. Really interesting points. I think this might be our last round of questions, so we can take a couple more from the floor. Lovely. We've got a microphone here already. Thank you. And then back.
Ian Douglas from Spears magazine. Thinking particularly about the Progressive Advisor Network. Look 10 years into the future. What are your ambitions for that, either as a client or an advisor?
Thank you.
Yes, I mean, it's been an amazing day and I'm extremely happy to be here. You expressed it eloquently, but I think we probably speak for all of us. I felt great empathy with Lauren. I mean, my money came out of the sky. I didn't sort of know I was going to get it. And it was a hideous journey through all that with all these advisors. You had no idea what was going on. I mean, I'm, you know, probably one of the oldest people in the room. So things, I'm sure, were very different then. Until I then discovered Network for Social Change, where now at least we talk about power and, you know, families as well as giving away all this money. But if this isn't a sort of, you know, clumsy question, I remember looking at, you know, you look at the amount you've made, has it gone up since last time, 3-month reports, and then you look at the percentages, and the percentage is based on the total. So are advisors going to be losing money if they start to invest in a different way, or how will they negotiate this? Is that a question?
Thank you. Lovely. Another question, thank you.
My name's Chris. I'm also a member of the Network for Social Change, which is a kind of UK giving circle. Stephanie spoke at our conference in October and blew everyone away. So thank you for that. And I'm kind of slightly shaken because my family lawyer spoke at my dad's funeral. so you're, you know, the fact of how connected we are is quite significant there. I'm interested in the sort of moral judgments going round, and I think we've been brought up to live in a competitive world, and that's how we live and breathe. And I think we maybe, if we start realizing we're kind of interconnected with each other and with the world, we don't have to be moral. It just falls away. So the moral compass, whether that needs to be there and whether it's actually unhelpful, so you're unethical or ethical, you're a goodie or a baddie. I think by somehow shifting it, something changes automatically.
Thank you. I've got another question at the back.
There's been a lot of industry groups tackling many different issues like the PRI, GFANZ, EIA. I could list a myriad of initiatives. The problem is a lot of them end up becoming lowest common denominator. How does the progressive advisor movement avoid that risk, and what are the kind of standard screens levels within the organization to avoid, greenwashing, for want of a better word?
Thank you. And a final question from down here. For this section, we might have a little bit of time to take some more, we'll see. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I think this is a little bit of just adding an idea into the space, which is that I fundamentally agree with everything that's been talked about around creating a system that is fair and just. And so we're not looking for these big, grand gestures from people or heroics. But I just want to introduce into the space that I also think there's a lot of great work happening with the radical imagination. And when the window of possibility gets made really small by what is felt possible within, whether you want to call it the Overton window or what society thinks is possible in a current time, which is probably shrunk at its all-time low in terms of that complete crisis of imagination, that I do think it's really important to make sure that as well as that system that builds the stories that we've heard today so beautifully, that we also know that wealth, philanthropy, foundations, before they all wind up into this beautiful just world that we're going to be in, has a real role to be able to seed the things that people yet don't feel possible. The community land trust back in a black land and spatial justice way, like people are doing in this movement, the work like Cassie does, or people I'm sitting next to, a lot of practitioners who think about things like beyond now and are like, look, let's open up that window of possibility so that once the possible becomes plausible and becomes real, the whole window stretches. And then we can all go further. But I just want to make sure really, really clearly that I don't mean that in place of a system and a structure, but I mean it more akin to a useful version of how much Elon Musk's innovation was publicly funded, right? Like he wasn't some just Imagineer that came up with this stuff. It was invested in. And so I just want to say that because it's been amazing to be here and watch y'all go on this journey as well, which is going to hopefully be a generational one, because this is going to take a lot of time and legal changes and policy and legislation, to also say that you can like throw stuff out there and get things moving and open the window of possibility whilst we're also figuring out that big structural change. And also, it's been really great. Thank you so much, Steph. Feels a little bit like the episode of The Crown to like normal people like me. I'm like, ooh, this is what it must be like to be around people with bare money. So yeah. Thanks a lot. But genuinely, I think there's a lot of space in that, and that I don't think we should shrink that, because it's maybe not as important, but it's really important. That experimentation, that ability to go further, the ability to move land and buildings back into common ownership quickly, to do those sorts of things can happen relatively easily. So, I just wanted to add that idea in, really.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Lovely. And I think we had another question that I've got, yes.
Hi. Hello, everybody. My name is Rebecca Gowland, and I am the director of Patriotic Millionaires UK, which I think you've heard mentioned a few times today. The organisation is one which is essentially and exclusively based on deploying the voice of wealth to address the destabilising impact that economic inequality is having on our country, on our democracy, and on the world's democracies and on the world. And we are facing a set of, as we've heard time and again today, ongoing and worryingly kind of endless decline, ecological decline, social decline, democratic decline, unless we address the concentration of extreme wealth. So that is the cost. I mean, that's the cost of extreme wealth, that decline. So I guess, by the way, this is my plug. If you want to join us, then please come and find me. I welcome every and all wealth holder. And we've got all kinds of things that you can get involved in. The thing that I wanted to say was the conversation around narrative and framing is absolutely right? We have to change the way that we talk about these issues. But what I have come to learn in being involved in this organisation is it's not just the language, it's the messenger, right? And the voice of wealth holds so much power and so much sway, and that's wrong, but it's true. And so it's heartwarming for me to see that there are willing voices of wealth ready to stand up and say and challenge the narrative. And the more of you that do that, the better. It's just so important. You're more influential than somebody like me, and that's just a truth that I hope you will listen to and you will take on board. So I guess what I wanted to say to Steph and Jake was thank you so much for facilitating this, because it's made me see that there is more potential for change, not just with transforming the narrative, but also with using the voice of wealth to help that narrative shift. And as James said earlier, this is inevitable, right? We are going to have to deal with this, because if we don't, then what we face is kind of social, ecological and democratic implosion, and nobody wants that. It's not good for any of us. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and I think I and everyone in the room echoes those thanks to Steph and to Jake for making this happen. I do want to do justice to those questions and comments we had, though, just before we wrap up. So we heard some thoughts on is the moral compass conversation the right conversation to have at this point in time? Is it helpful? We've had questions around... sorry, I've lost my train of thought again. Apologies. We've had questions around the moral compass. Oh, the progressive advisor, we had a couple of questions around that. So, you know, in terms of the movement, what's next? How can it avoid the common pitfalls, things like greenwashing? So I'll throw those back to the panel, and then we'll finalise for the day. Thank you.
I think it also deals a bit with the greenwashing point. We don't have to deal with it so big. We can do lots of little things, and amazing what happens when somebody puts some money in something, it does some magic, and then they go and tell all their friends that did magic. And, you know, like, I just think we don't, I think I said something to James earlier, we don't have to eat the elephant, right? Everyone go and do something little, and then you'll see magic can happen. And that doesn't change the big, I get that, I totally understand what you're saying, but please just don't think of it as a massive problem, because then you'll do nothing and worry that if you do something, you'll just be criticised for it. Do something that people don't criticise little things, it's okay.
Thank you. Any last comments from the panel?
Can I just pick up one about where the progressive advisors will be in 10 years' time? I think we, as an industry, need to recognise the issues and the problems, and I'm not sure that a lot of the decision makers actually do at the present moment in time. So I think that's a challenge. And I think with that comes a huge unlearning of everything that we thought the wealth industry is about. I think also fee structures, remuneration structures also need to change. But I'm positive it will, again, not least as has been said before, this changes are coming, and I know from a fact that the millennials and Gen Y that work in the business that I'm in will not be in the business unless these difficult decisions are actually faced and changed. So I'm positive, but it does need reflections right at the top of the tree, and the whole narrative around money and what it's for is quite sick at the present moment in time.
Thank you.
Just to come back on the charging point, because it's a very valid point, because the investment management charging structure is designed to essentially align the interests of the client with the investment person by having an ad valorem fee that is based on the assets under management. But that in itself assumes that you're trying to go for this growth model, which may not be the case. So I think that definitely needs some rethought and some how this might look in a progressive environment. Essentially, I don't know how that might look, but off the top of my head, linking a charging structure or fees to social or environmental outcomes might be a better way of viewing the future as a model. But it definitely needs reflection, because at the current time it is based on a growth model for advisors and the client. But yeah.
Great. I think we've got a final comment down the end, if that's okay. Thank you.
It's like being at a children's party. I actually just wanted to make a comment about leadership, because I think so many of these questions play into leadership, and it's very hard for an industry which is based on sort of conservatism and protection to step out and take leadership. But I was just reflecting as I was listening to some of the questions. I'm a cricket fan, and for those cricket fans in the room will know this, but a couple of rock stars have basically taken over the England Test team, a guy called Brendan McCullum from New Zealand and Ben Stokes, and they have basically set out to completely reinvent Test cricket. And it's mind-blowing if you're a cricket fan. And Rizwan, who's the great Pakistani wicketkeeper batsman, said yesterday that they have basically completely rethought Test cricket, and it's going to take Pakistan a little bit of time to catch up. And it was such an amazing thing for him to say. It was such a humble thing for him to say. But what it was really doing is it was talking to leadership. And it strikes me that there is a group of leaders in this room, and there is clearly a system which is breaking down and a new system that is needing to come into its place. And it is being birthed. And I suppose it's just an opportunity for that leadership. And it's a really exciting moment. And it's going to take time, and it needs to be worked through. No one knows what it's going to end up looking like. But that's kind of part of the joy of the process, and I recognise the difficulty of that journey for an industry which is so heavily regulated, with such kind of embedded cultural requirements and expectations and so forth. But it's there to be done, and it feels like you know, there is going to be great reward for those people who are able to kind of take that leadership. So, yeah, I'm very inspired by this room. Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely. And can we say a massive thank you to all of our